Hello guys, Robin here from Cheese from Scratch. So today you are joining me in my homestead kitchen where I haven't put the dishes away yet. So I should stand this way, but the sun is coming in and I have to stand over here. So you just have to look at my clean dishes. Actually, I should just have a whole video on, look, I did the dishes, guys. Um, anyways, so you are joining me today where I'm going to talk about cheese presses because there are so many different choices for cheese presses, and a lot of people are like, what should I choose and how should I choose it? And should I buy a cheese press right off the bat or should I hold off? And so we're going to kind of dive into that today and look at all of the different kinds. And I am super fortunate. Just in the last year, as I started this business, I've accumulated a lot of cheese presses, which seems so funny because I made cheese for so long with like a stack of books and a cheese press that I didn't really like. So now here in this last year, I just have a ton of cheese presses and I am excited to show you all of them. So starting off, when I first learned how to make cheese, and you may have heard me ramble on about this story, but I went off and I thought that you had to have a cheese press to make cheese. And so I went off and I bought this kind of beginner to cheese making kit, because a lot of times you can find these kits that have a cheese press in them and they have all the things that you need within the kit. And so that was not the best one that I've ever had in my life, because I ended up with this cheese press that I didn't really like for a lot of years. And it wasn't the worst thing ever, but it was just one that I didn't really like. So that's the one that we're going to start with. And then we're going to go into homemade presses. We're going to go into Dutch presses. We're going to go into spring presses. We're even going to talk about a lard press, because I have a lard press. Who has a lard press? I have a lard press. So we're going to talk about all the different presses and the pros and cons and what I would do differently next time, which ones I recommend, and all of that jazz. All right, so to start this video, we're going to talk about, do you even need to press your cheese? So that's the first kind of question that I sometimes get. Not a lot, actually, because people mostly think that cheese needs to be pressed in a press, but including me, I thought that when I first started making cheese. But there's a lot of cheeses that don't actually need an actual press. They can be made in these little forms. So this is just a homemade one. It's just got nail holes that I poked into it. If you ever make these, always make sure you poke from the inside out so you don't have the little jagged edges on the inside. That's a side note. But anyways, a lot of cheeses, for example, feta, brie, those types of cheeses are such a soft curd that they're actually able to press with their own weight. So you would fill this to the top and you're going to end up with a cheese that's about that big. So you don't need a press when you're starting out, especially if you're just going to be making feta to start off with. So that is kind of just a side note to let you know that you don't always need a cheese press to make cheese. But for cheeses that are going to be aged for a long time, that's where you start to need a cheese press. And the reason for that is that cheese presses press all the moisture out of the cheese. And so historically, when you had no choice, you had to store your cheese over the winter. That was going to be your food source. That's where presses came in. And I think history and cheese presses is one of the neatest things. You look in some of the history books and some of the just resources online and stuff, and there's these cheese presses that were built into stone houses. They were built into the walls. I would love to have a cheese press built into my kitchen. If anyone knows how to do that, can you just come and build one right there? Because I think that what a cool conversation piece to have a cheese press in your kitchen. I have 5, but one that's built into the wall. That sounds super cool. So they use the cheese presses to press all the way out of the cheese, or most of the way out of the cheese, so that they would store a lot longer, because we all know that things that have less moisture do last longer. You had to hydrate a piece of jerky so that that moisture is out of that meat so that it can be stored for a long time. You press all the way out of the cheese so that that cheese can be stored for a long time. So these moisture type cheeses, like these ones, they wouldn't store for a ton of time. Like you've got brie, it'll last maybe 6 months or not 6 months, 6 weeks or so, but after that it's not so good. Same with feta. Feta is stored in a brine though, so it's lasting a lot longer. But if you're just planning to have it on the shelf, if it hasn't had all that moisture kind of cooked or pressed out of it, then you're going to run into troubles with spoiling. So we will get into that later on. But I just thought I would do a little side note about these. All right, so now we're going to get into the actual cheese presses. So like I said, when I first started out, I went and bought a cheese press, and I wish I hadn't, because it is the twist cheese press. And so this is usually the ones that you find when you're first starting out, because you're kind of looking for the cheapest option. And these really are the cheapest options. So these can easily be made at home as well. They basically come on a board like this. You have two large bolt screw things. I don't know what they're called. You have two of these large things, and then you've got your form, which can be anything. It could be the round outside of a bucket. It can be anything. And then you have your follower, which goes on. You put your cheese in there, and it's cheesecloth. You put that down, and then you put this part on. And so I just call these twist presses. Put this on, and you're twisting. You put bolts on top of here, and you're twisting it down and applying pressure through this twist bolt thing. So is that a technical word? I don't know if a twist bolt thing is a technical word, but that is what I'm going to call it. This twist bolt thing twists down, presses the whey out of your cheese, and effectively presses your cheese. And so it's a good, effective way of pressing cheese, but there are a few cons to it. So let's kind of talk about the pros. I've got a list of pros here that I talked about. So compact. It is nice and compact. It can easily fit in any of my cupboards in the kitchen. It can fit up there. It can fit here. It's not very big. And it actually makes a pretty good sized cheese. Like I can make a cheese in this one. I should have let me go get a tape measure. So it's pretty compact. Like I can make a cheese in this one though. That's a fairly good sized cheese. Like this goes across 7 inches. It is, yeah, 7 inches at the top. Nope, yep. 6.5 inches at the top. So I can make a cheese in this that is like about 4 pounds is probably the max cheese that I get out of this one. But it's a pretty decent size for the compactness of it. So that's a good benefit of it, is that if you don't have a lot of kitchen space, you can still store it really easily. Another really good thing about it, just like I mentioned before, it is the cheapest one on the market usually. Typically, it's also the cheapest one to make at home because it doesn't take, like, I feel like I'm not mechanical at all and I could make that. So it is a cheap option in that sense. You don't need anything heavy. So in the next one that we talk about, I'm going to show you how to kind of DIY one with a stack of books, but this, you don't need a stack of books. This is all you need. And so that's a really great benefit of it. And another really great benefit of this one is that you can make pretty hard pressed cheeses. So cheddar is notoriously a hard cheese to make. It's actually not a hard cheese to make. It is notoriously a hard cheese to press. So usually that's the one that people want to make. And they often struggle with homemade presses to be able to press it properly. But this type of press will effectively press a cheddar because you can get so much pressure on it with this twist. So that is a really good benefit of it if you're planning on making a lot of the harder type cheeses that are like cheddared, and cheddared type cheeses like Cheshire and cheddar just notoriously are harder to press because they go through that cheddaring stage. Other hard types of cheeses are like Parmesan and Asiago, but usually a homemade press can press those. It's the ones that go through that squeaky cheddaring phase that are really difficult to press. So these can make cheddars. So that is a really amazing benefit of them. Cons. So here we go into the cons. So these are really good for harder type cheeses like Parmesans, cheddars, those types of ones. They can be trickier for moister type cheeses, which is surprising. I think a lot of people wouldn't see this being a problem. And I certainly didn't see it being a problem myself as a newbie cheesemaker when I first got this one. But I started to see it as I used it. So this cheese, it is super hard to regulate how much pressure you put on it because you need to put as much pressure as you basically can on it at the beginning. And the reason for that is as the cheese sinks down, there's no more pressure on it. You have to keep coming back and twisting this to be able to keep the pressure on it. So when you make a cheese that's moister, like Colby's or Gouda's or Havarti's, you have to put quite a bit of pressure on there so that you don't have to come back every 5 minutes and twist it. Well, with those moisture type cheeses, what happens when you put a whole bunch of pressure on is that the outside will dry, and then the inside, those curds are still very moist inside there. And so the outside is dried and those moist curds on the inside are still wet, and that moisture can't escape out the dry edges. And so then you get a bunch of moisture trapped inside your cheese. And so you'll often find in these presses that there's a ton of mechanical holes, and you'll be like, why the heck is there so many mechanical holes in this cheese? And it's because moisture got trapped in there because there was too much pressure straight off the bat. And so my recommendation for that is to not put as much pressure on for that first 30 minutes and then gradually go up. And most recipes will have you do that anyways. They'll say press at light pressure for 30 minutes and then flip it and then go on to medium pressure. Well, it's just really hard with this one to regulate what's medium pressure, what's light pressure, and to kind of figure that out. It's not impossible. I certainly make good cheeses. I make good Goudas. I make good Colbys and Havardis in this press. It just takes a little bit of kind of fiddling around and figuring out how you're going to do that. And so what's the problem if you get a bunch of moisture trapped inside your cheese is that you will have a lot of mechanical holes. And a lot of moisture trapped inside a cheese, if it's a little bit, like a few mechanical holes, I'm like, whatever. A few mechanical holes, that's just part of it. You're always going to have a few mechanical holes in home cheese making. But if there's a lot of them and there's a ton of moisture trapped in there, then you're going to get a bitter tasting cheese. You're also opening it up to a lot higher risk of contamination, and it's just not going to store as well for as long. So that's one thing to think about with this press. Another thing, I just kind of talked about that, is that you have to keep coming back. So unlike other presses that have direct pressure, and as the cheese goes down, they also go down, this one, as soon as that cheese goes down, there's nothing pressing it for a little bit until you come back and turn it. So it's not really a press that you would want to use all the time overnight. It's more of a press where you're hanging around the kitchen, you're going to come back every once in a while and give it a turn. So that's a kind of a con of this one. And then another one is just one of the tricks of the trade that you learn as you go. It sucks to every time you have to come back and redress this cheese. And this is just kind of like a finicky little thing of mine, a little pet peeve of mine. But it sucks every time you have to come back and redress this cheese. You have to unscrew this, take off this, and then you can pull your cheese out, redress it, put it back in, put this back on, screw it up again. So it's time consuming. And when you've already spent 4 hours in the kitchen making this cheese, now you have to come back like twice and do that. You're like, oh my goodness, can I just have a press that's a little easier than this? So that's my last kind of con for this one. But like I said, I have made good cheeses out of this one. If this is the press you have, you can totally make it work for you. But if you don't have a press yet and you're kind of in the market for one, I wouldn't recommend this one. That's my personal opinion on this cheese press. Is this not the coolest thing you've ever seen? So this is a lard press or an apple press or a cheese press. It is whatever you want it to be. So when about 6 months ago, we were cleaning out my grandma's garage, and my grandma passed away quite a few years ago now, but we were cleaning out her garage, and my stepdad was like, hey, I think that this is a cheese press. So it is kind of. So it is actually, traditionally, it is a lard press, but it can also be used for making wine or making apples. Historically, it was probably used for almost everything on the homestead. And that's one of the things I love about homestead cheese making, is that the equipment that you get, it doesn't necessarily have to be used for making cheese. You can use it for all sorts of things, like the vacuum sealer. I use it for tons of things. I use it for meat processing. I use it for vegetable processing, and I also use it for cheese. And so I'm just peeking out behind this beast. It's super heavy. So when I found this and was gifted it from my mom, I was like, whoa, this is so cool, because what is the history behind this thing? Like, what is it? I didn't even know that it was a lard press when I first got it. And then a few people told me it was a lard press, but it definitely would work as a cheese press. So if you have something vintage hanging around like this, you can totally make it work for you. The one thing about this one is you need a lot of cows to be able to make a cheese that would not be a pancake cheese if you put enough curds in there. So that's the thing about cheese presses, is you want to make sure that you are having a cheese press that will make a cheese that is the size you need. So because you don't want to have a pancake cheese like this one that I have here. So this one that I have here, when I fill it to the top, even after I press it, it's only going to be about that big. So it's going to go down quite a bit. So you have to kind of consider that with these when you're picking out a cheese press. But I just wanted to show this because it's super cool. One day I might use it to make cheese. I've thought about cleaning it up. It definitely needs a ton of cleaning and some vinegar, and I don't know what else it needs. But it's very cool, and I like the sentiment behind it that it could be used for so many different things on the homestead. So when you're picking out a cheese press, that's also a time when you can also think, what else could I use this for? And if it's something, maybe you need a lard press and you also need a cheese press. So maybe this is something that you want to go for. And like the twist press, it is exactly like the twist press. So you're going to have the same cons. You're going to have to come back and turn it. You're going to have to kind of regulate that pressure right off the bat when you're making a moisture type cheese, because then you're going to have problems. But if you're, like I said, if you're going to be using it for other things, you might as well. Yeah, so I really love this one. It's super heavy. I kind of use it just as like a decor top discussion piece in the house, but I one day might use it. I really like that it's got the lip here for the whey to come out. This one, the other one that I have, that I was just talking about, it doesn't have a lip like that. The whey still drains out fine, but this would just facilitate the whey draining a little bit better, I think. Although I don't know, it might get stuck in the back here. I'm not sure. So that's just another thing to kind of think about. All right, so now we're on to the spring twist press. So this is a close relative to the other ones that I was talking about, but this one has springs. So this is another common, cheaper version that you're going to get on the market. And in my opinion, this is kind of the step up from that other one. If you're looking for kind of a cheaper option, one with a spring is a really good option. And the reason for that is that it has all the same pros and cons as the other one, but a pro is that you do not have to come back and twist it all the time, because as the pressure goes down, so I'll show you here, put that in there. Oops, I did it wrong. As the pressure goes down, you've got a can or something here to press this down. You've got your springs in here, and you can have 1 or 2 springs. And some twister things. This is another really easy DIY one to do. As the pressure goes down on there, the springs will slowly release as the cheese drains, and the springs will slowly release. So you're constantly having pressure on there. It's just not going to be as much as the cheese releases. So that's a really good benefit of these. One thing that is a con with these is that I found it easier to press harder cheeses in the other twist press one. With these springs, it kind of inhibits the amount of pressure you can apply. Not completely, but it does a little bit. Like I found in this one, I wasn't able to properly press cheddars as well as I could properly press them without the springs in there. So you can always take the springs out though too. So that's the benefit of these types of presses. So same pros and cons basically, other than this is probably the one that you want to buy if you're kind of looking between the two of them. With these spring type presses, you'll often get a little kind of block like this. And so this helps you, it will come with directions, and it helps you kind of know how much pressure you're applying. Like say right here is 10 pounds of pressure, right here. If you go down to the next notch, it's like little stairs. If you go down to the next notch, that's 20 pounds of pressure. So that kind of makes things a little bit more accurate for you. But with homestead cheese making, it's hard to go by pounds of pressure. And I can post an equation. Maybe I will post the equation just so you can see how confusing the equation actually is, because it's not super applicable to homestead cheesemakers. Like you can make cheese without having to do math. And I think that's something that people get really hung up on. They're like, how much pressure do I apply? And you really just have to go with experience. And like I said in previous videos, where you're just making a couple types of cheeses to start off with. You're not making 200 different types of cheeses, you're making 2 types of cheeses. And those 2 types of cheeses, after troubleshooting, you're figuring out how they need to be pressed. And so that, to me, is a better way of figuring out pressure than having to do the math calculation, because the math calculation is confusing to me because I am not good at math, but I can do it. I'm not very good at it. So for me, the best way to figure out pressure is to just kind of do it. Assess when you redress. When I redress the cheese, I'm looking at how well it's pressing, if it's drying out too quickly, if it's all knit together, if it's not quite knit together. And so I'm assessing at that point how much more pressure I need to add. Because you always want to start lower, like I said before, and go higher. So that's my way, my non-math way of pressing cheese. With the spring presses and with the Dutch presses, it's a little bit easier to figure out the math calculation if that is a route that you want to go. If you want to make sure that you're properly pressing your cheese every single time, especially when you're beginning and you just don't know what to expect, then you can totally go with the math calculation, and it's easier to figure out with the spring press and with the Dutch press how many pounds of pressure you need. The trouble with that is when you get into making your own press at home, your own direct pressure press. So when you do that math calculation, you will be so shocked about how big the number is of pounds that you need to put on top of your cheese to be able to actually press it properly. And so that's not a true number when you're doing direct pressure, because it's impossible. You'll get a number like, say, 150 pounds on top of your cheese, unless you're like a weightlifter and you have a bunch of super heavy weights that you can, and you're super good at balancing and you can balance it on top. But if you're just kind of like have a stack of books and you're like, oh no, I can't press cheese because I don't have 100 pounds of books to put on top of my cheese, that's not true. You can still make cheese, and there's some just ways that will kind of facilitate your pressing. So when I make a DIY home press, I usually have a cutting board. You want to have something that's solid that you can put in the bottom of your draining tray so that your cheese is elevated above the way that's going to drain. So just like with this press, it's got this board in here that keeps it out of the way. I also use a cutting board. I just don't have one right now. It's better to go with something, the reason I don't have one right now is because it sat in way too much and it broke into pieces. So it's better to go with something that's not going to wreck after sitting in way for so long. So maybe like a plastic board or something like that. Okay, so my very simple DIY cheese press. Here we go. So put your board in, springform pan. When you use a springform pan, go for one that's not too large. Here it is. This one is 7.5 inches across. So you want to go for one that's not too large because you don't want to end up with pancake cheese. You can use other things for cheese forms. You can use this if you have it, but if you're just starting out and you don't have anything, springform pans are excellent things that people often just have around. So you put your board in, you put that in, this is your follower, and then you're going to get a bucket of warm water. And this is where you start to not have to be using that math calculation with the pounds of pressure, because if you add a bucket of warm water or a bucket of warm whey even, that's going to facilitate the pressing better than if you just don't have anything warm on there. When the curds are warm, they press better. And so this is going to help you not have to put a ton of pressure onto your cheese. The next thing you're going to do, you've got your bucket of warm water, you've got your cheese in there, you're going to stack this on here. And so this is an excellent press. I have pressed so many cheeses in just this one, like this simple everything I already have in my house press, and it works really good. And it's nowhere near to the amount of pressure you actually need on a cheese. And I've made cheddars in here. Cheddars are a little bit harder to make because they are a harder type cheese to press. You do need a few extra books, but I've made Goudas and Colbys. I've made probably hundreds of cheese in the simple little press that costs me zero money at all. And so that just goes to show, if you use the warm way or the warm water, you don't need to use hundreds of pounds of pressure to press your cheese. And you can throw the math calculation out the window because it's hard on my brain. Anyways, I don't always recommend throwing it out the window, but in this case you can. And so that just goes with homestead cheese making and making those couple types of cheeses. You learn how many books you need to stack on top. For a Gouda, I need 10 books. For maybe a Colby, I need 15 books. And you just figure out how many you need and how many more you need to add. And it's a really beneficial way to, it's a really good way to press your cheese. Did I have notes on it? The worst thing about it, the very worst thing about it, is that it falls over all the time. I've cleaned up so many messes from this cheese press because it tips over. And especially when I'm making a harder type cheese like a cheddar, I'll have it stacked to the nines and then I'll come in and it will have fallen over. And there's whey everywhere and it's just no fun. So that is why I didn't just stick with this cheese press, because this cheese press was working really well for me until I went out, and now I have tons of cheese presses, but this one was working really well for me. And so when you're starting out, this will work fine for you. Yeah, I think that's all the pros and cons of that one. And yeah, I really recommend it. Another way to make cheese in a DIY press, and this is where you need a lot of cows or you need a smaller bucket than this. So Zach made me this. This is a super simple cheese press, but I only do it when I'm milking 2 cows because you need so many curds to fit in there, or else you end up with a pancake cheese. And what happens with pancake cheeses is, 1, they are super dry, and 2, they're just pancake cheeses. So you want to have a cheese that has some substance to it, and that's going to help you not have such a dry cheese. So if you have a ton of milk, like when I was milking 2 cows, this one will work great. So I was making giant cheeses in here. The problem with making giant cheeses is that you also have to figure out a way of aging them. So you can cut them in half, do whatever you have to do there. But this is a way that you can just DIY press, and you can do it with a smaller bucket too. You could drill holes in this one. The only problem is you have to remember that you want to have enough pressure. So basically, to get enough pressure, I need to have a 5-gallon bucket on top of this one. So another 5-gallon bucket fits in here, whereas it's hard to get enough pressure unless I'm making, maybe a Havarti might be okay. If I was making a cheese that would fit in this one and have enough pressure with a littler bucket. So that is that one. But again, you don't need as much pressure because you're putting warm water or warm whey in that bucket. So that is another good DIY way to make cheese, but it's not the best. The other way is better. This is just if you're making a ton of cheese and you can't get enough pressure. All right. So now for the Dutch press. This is my favorite cheese press. This is the one that I waited for forever, and I love it so much, and I will use it till the day that I die. This is that cheese press, and I love this one so much because, I got my hair stuck in it. I love this one so much because of a very minuscule little detail about it. So as far as pressing goes and stuff, it's fine to add pressure and stuff. It's not too hard. You can press good hard type cheeses like cheddars and stuff. It works good like that, but you can do that with the other ones. What I really love about this cheese press is that when you go to redress your cheese, oops, I've got it set at a different setting right now. Anyways, so this is in there. You go to redress your cheese. All you have to do is pull it out, pull your cheese out, flip it over, redress it, put it back in, and stick it back in your cheese press, and you're done. Whereas the other one, I talked about before, you have to untwist and take this off and do this. This is like super quick and super easy for redressing. And that is the one reason that I love this cheese press more than all the other ones. It's not because it presses better, it presses probably the same as the other ones, but I love that feature in it. So that's probably my biggest reason for loving, other than that it just looks really nice and I love having it in my kitchen. Just like I was talking about before about having a cheese press built into the wall. This is like, I keep it on my windowsill and it's beautiful and I love it and I just look at it sometimes. So I love that one for those reasons. Cons of it, it's a bit of a beast. So if you don't have a lot of kitchen room, it is quite large, a Dutch press is. So 20 inches across. Oh, even if I want to take the handle, it's like hard to keep in a cupboard and stuff if you have to keep it away. I have the room, I made the room for it to be living in my kitchen though. And it is also a little bit tricky when you first start out using it. When I'm actually back to making some cheese, because I'm just waiting for we're weaning Suki right now off of her calves, but when I'm back to making some cheese, I'll do a little video on how to actually calculate the pressure for it and stuff. So it is a little bit trickier to figure out right off the bat, but once you get it, you're like, oh, this is not too bad at all. Basically, how you apply pressure to it is you take jugs, hang them on the end, and that applies the pressure. And the one good thing, another good thing about this press is that most of them, and this is something to look for too when you're looking for a Dutch press, they fit over your sink. So that's a really great thing about this. I can just put a little draining tray in the sink and it sits over top of there, because I think if you were trying to find something that this would sit in and drain properly in, it would be a little bit of a chore. So putting it over your sink is a good hack for using a Dutch press. Yeah, other than that, this is my favorite. You could the Dutch presses do tend to be a little bit more costly. They're probably the ones that are the most expensive on the market. But again, they're kind of an investment piece. I will use that cheese press until the day I die, as long as I take good care of it. So that kind of concludes our cheese press video, I think. I'm sure I forgot some things, some points and stuff, but I think I covered quite a few things. So I hope that this video helps you to be able to make a choice for a cheese press, or just kind of make a homemade DIY cheese press for a while and then maybe invest in a Dutch press later on in your cheese making career. So yeah, thanks guys for watching. Oh, and don't forget to hit subscribe, because I'm trying to build this YouTube channel so I can keep creating content. And follow me over on Instagram. That's where I'm most active. I'm like on Instagram a lot. So yeah, bye guys.